Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today we're going to be talking about some Week 3 waiver wire targets and how much you should spend in your free agent acquisition budget.
Hike!
All right, Joe, so we're going to be talking about 5 names. The first guy I'm going to be talking about is quarterback Derek Carr. The Saints have done quite well the first 2 weeks, and now against the Cowboys, Derek Carr had 16 attempts, 11 completions, 243 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 1 pick, and a rushing touchdown. That now means that he's had back-to-back 3 touchdown games. Now, Joe, I believe you think that in most Superflex leagues he's rostered. I think, he may or may not be in Sleeper. He's rostered at 20%. So, Joe, how much FAAB would you put for Derek Carr?
Yeah, I would say, I'm thinking he's, like you said, I'm thinking he's rostered in most Superflex leagues. I do think he is a guy that maybe if you're in a redraft league, maybe you want to stream him. Maybe you decided to draft a rookie quarterback, like Caleb Williams. He hasn't going as well as you might have thought. So Derek Carr is an interesting option for you to add. And I'd probably go 5 to 10% of my FAAB budget on him. He's got a pretty, honestly, he's facing Philly next week. The week after that, he has at Atlanta. Could be a tougher matchup at KC, Tampa Bay, Denver. Those are some of the upcoming matchups that he has. So it'll be interesting to see how they fare. Like you said, week 1, they faced the Panthers. I think we were all ready to put it as an outlier. Then they travel into Dallas, and I'm not so sure how good Dallas defense really is, but for them to just go in there and smash him in the mouth, and honestly, 243 passing yards on only 11 completions is pretty remarkable. I mean, this is a team that, they've liked to air it out. They got Rashid Shaheed that they've targeted deep down the field, and Clint Kubiak looks like he's got, turned around Derek Carr and kind of has his offense moving.
Yeah, I would say in a Superflex league, if he is available, I would say 10 to 20%. And he might even be a guy I might be willing to trade for to acquire. In a traditional league, 5% or less. I think he's a streamer at the end of the day. Now quarterback scoring in general has been pretty low, interestingly enough. As far as some of the top players, like if you have Mahomes, you're probably pretty disappointed right now. He's a guy who most likely he was drafted, either 1 or 2 in your league. So I would say that, because the quarterback scoring hasn't been as high, maybe you do have this guy on your bench just in case. You never know. I mean, Jordan Love got injured. Your quarterback may go down. You want to have, an insurance policy just in case. But in a traditional league, I don't think you'd have to. I'd probably put $1 or $2, to be honest with you. I wouldn't put much more.
Yeah, it just depends on, what your other people in your league, what their quarterback situation is like. I mean, I'd imagine if somebody even has like Trevor Lawrence, he's been pretty disappointing. They might be looking to, stream him, especially, for this week 3 matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. I think it should be interesting. I think there is potential for a possible shootout there.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So the next player we're going to be talking about is running back Braelon Allen of the New York Jets. Now, I don't know. I know you're probably not this type of person, Joe, but Breece Hall owners are probably not very happy because Braelon Allen, although limited touches, did get in the end zone twice. He had 7 carries, 33 yards, and a rushing touchdown, and then 2 targets, 2 catches for 23 yards, and a receiving touchdown. So Braelon Allen, a guy who, had a lot of buzz coming out of Wisconsin when he was, younger and maybe in his sophomore season, when it came to actually during the draft time, he kind of slid. So how much percentage of FAAB would you drop for Braelon Allen?
Yeah, I wouldn't do much. I'm not too excited about getting Braelon Allen. You maybe just want him as, if you're the Breece Hall owner, I think, prioritize him more. To maybe where I'd say 5% if you're a Breece Hall owner, but if not, I don't know. I mean, if you want to take a dart throw on him and go $1 to $3 or whatever to try to get him and just add him just in case. But Breece Hall still got his chances in this game. Scored you 24 fantasy points. You're pretty happy, but I think it is disappointing if you are a Breece Hall owner just to see possibly this guy is stealing some of the goal line work and possibly stealing some touchdowns.
I do think it's interesting, though, that if you look at his total snap count, he was at 20 snaps to Breece Hall's 41 and ended up having 7 carries to Breece Hall's 14 and had 4 targets to Breece Hall's 8. So almost kind of half of what Breece Hall had, which I think for those, it's interesting because I actually liked Breece Hall better than Bijan Robinson, because I thought that Algier could have been more of a factor than Braelon Allen, because Braelon Allen wasn't really known as a receiving back. And, he actually looked pretty good today. So he's the type of guy that I kind of like to have interest in, because running backs get injured all the time, and he would just kind of come right into play. If I have an extra bench spot, I wouldn't mind putting. See, it gets how much would you have to spend? If you're the Breece Hall owner, you're like, okay, I'm going to need to spend up. I think you could probably get him for around 5% of your FAAB budget. I don't know if I'd spend any more, because at the end of the day, if Breece Hall stays healthy, then what good is Allen? I don't know. I mean, I think, I don't know if
that's the thing, yeah.
It's going to be an 80-20, 70-30 split, from here on out. So it's like, can you really start Braelon Allen? It's more so like, okay, if Breece Hall gets injured, then you've got Braelon Allen, and now you're cooking.
Right. And that's the thing. I think it'd be hard for me if I'm not the Breece Hall owner to pick him up, because it's like, I don't know if Braelon Allen's necessarily that league winner that just steps in and dominates for you. Kind of like what you would think, Blake Corum would do in, LA if anything were to happen to Kyron Williams. I don't see Braelon Allen as that same type of player.
So let's go over the wide receivers, Joe. We've got wide receiver Quentin Johnston, who once thought he was a bust. Now maybe he's come back to life here. Against the Carolina Panthers, he had 6 targets, 5 catches for 51 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns. So and right now in sleeper leagues, he's rostered at 16%. So he's not very well rostered. I think that's going to change after this waiver wire period. How much FAAB would you be putting down for Quentin Johnston?
Yeah. It's interesting. Even on ESPN, he's 6.9% rostered. So he's not heavily rostered. I would probably just say, probably around 5%. I'm not looking to blow a ton of FAAB on him just because of this 2 touchdown performance. He does look better, does look like a bigger part of the offense, but this also was against the Carolina Panthers. I'll be curious to see this not upcoming week. They've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, and if he's able to continue that success against a defense like Steelers, I'd put more stock in that, and then maybe take a look at it. But I do think it is interesting. Before the draft season, I thought Josh Palmer could potentially be the wide receiver 1 for the team, but right now Quentin Johnston kind of looks like Herbert's go-to guy.
Well, if you look at it, he led the receivers in snaps, right? Palmer had 30, McConkey had 34, Johnston had 48. He also led the team in routes run. He had 19, McConkey 15, and Palmer 14. And then Johnston had the most amount of targets at 6. But 6 isn't that many targets. That's the thing. This Chargers team is not a high pass volume offense. This is not the Chargers of before. Now that Jim Harbaugh is there, they're a run-first team. We knew that was going to happen when he came in as the head coach. So it's like, I'm somewhat interested in Johnston. I think I'm with you. I think you said 5%. I think that's probably about right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's like he had the 2 touchdowns, which really inflated his value. So I don't really know if you should chase that. I don't know. Touchdowns are fluky. That's not something that's a repeatable stat. Now you're going to have guys like Laporta, right? Like last year, who got a ton of touchdowns. It was just his year to do that. Maybe Johnston is, but he's not also the most reliable hands catcher. So, I wouldn't chase this one too much. I'd say 5%, but there are going to be some people who are going to be frustrated, right? I mean, there's some receivers out there that have not done very well, who are bigger names, and some people, and I want to drop those names, but you may be like, if you've got a Michael Pittman or you've got a, Terry McLaurin, you might say to yourself, wow, these guys aren't doing anything for me. I might as well go get Quentin Johnston. If you got a bench spot, go for him, but I wouldn't go nuts.
Yeah, I wouldn't go nuts either, and I think that's a good point. Like, I don't know how many guys I'd be willing to drop for Johnston, but if you do happen to have a bench spot because a guy, got hurt and on IR, I think he's a possible stash. But also, just don't like the couple upcoming weeks. I mean, they got at Pittsburgh, then at home against the Chiefs as well, and then they have an early Week 5 bye, which doesn't help you either.
Right. I mean, I could see someone saying, hey, I'm going to drop Rome Odunze. Hasn't been really involved in the offense. I'm going to pick up Quentin Johnston. If that happens, I might be the guy who scoops up Rome Odunze, hoping that he gets involved later on in the year.
100%. I mean, just in tonight's game alone, you saw him have a, pretty nice play towards the end of the game. Especially with these rookies, the thing, offenses are going to take time. Mainly with the rookie quarterback as well. If at some point these things are going to start to gel, and these players are going to do better. So that's always why we, always say watch who people are dropping, because if somebody like Odunze hits, I'd much rather stash him.
So let's go on to another receiver here, Joe. Wide receiver Alec Pierce. He seems to be the deep threat in Indianapolis, and he keeps getting touchdowns. So now he had 7 targets, which was better than last game. He had 3 targets before. Now he had 7 targets, 5 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. He's rostered in 24% of sleeper leagues. So, Joe, we're starting to see a trend here with Alec Pierce. Is he worth adding? And if so, how much FAAB?
Yeah, I think Alec Pierce at this point definitely is worth adding. Just because he's one of the guys that we've actually seen him do it, in back-to-back weeks. I think he's worth adding. In terms of starting him, he's got a couple of tougher matchups coming up with the Bears and the Steelers back-to-back. Has a nice matchup against the Jaguars in Week 5, though. So I don't know if I'm going crazy for any of these guys. I might stick with that 5% range. I do think he's interesting. And honestly, he seemed to be more integrated in the offense than a guy like Michael Pittman. At this point, Richardson likes taking those down the field shots. And like you mentioned, he is that guy at this point.
So this might surprise you. It surprises me. He led the team in snaps. So he outsnapped Michael Pittman and Adonai Mitchell with 53 snaps. Pittman had 48. Yeah. He ran the most route run at 34. Pittman had 33. And he led the team in targets of 8, and Michael Pittman had 7. So based on this past game, actually Alec Pierce was the receiver that was most utilized in the offense, which is quite surprising if you ask me. But Richardson, he's the type of guy who maybe he's not the most accurate, but he loves to just launch it down the field, and that's Pierce's game. So,
and that's what I was worried about, with Michael Pittman before the season. That's why I was off of Michael Pittman, because Minshew was really the dump it down. Like, Michael Pittman's not the down the field guy, and that's what Richardson likes to do. And that's why Pierce wasn't really a factor, last year. So it's just kind of the polar opposites of the scales in terms of quarterback play.
I would say 5% sounds about right, but I could make the argument that I actually think Pierce should be a higher priority than Quentin Johnston. Not as much of a flashy name. I think people would actually lean towards more Quentin Johnston because he's a former first-round pick. People thought he could be this really good player. He's on the Chargers. They're 2-0. He's got Herbert, right? But based on the numbers, I think Pierce actually is probably the better pickup.
Yeah, I would agree. And, we've seen it back-to-back weeks of him at least getting the touchdown, and he's been getting the deep passes. So if that's going to continue to happen, I mean, Richardson is just going to continue to trust this guy and just know if I throw it up to him, Pierce is going to come down with it.
All right, so our last player that we're going to be talking about, which, Joe, kudos to you. Clap, clap, bravo, because you said this guy was going to be a good player, and I kind of was like, what? What were you talking about? And that's tight end Hunter Henry. Yes, Hunter Henry's been in the league for 8 years, and he's still going strong. And he had quite a performance against the Seattle Seahawks. He had 12 targets, 8 catches, 109 yards. No touchdowns yet, but he's rostered in 22% of leagues. The tight end position in general has been kind of abysmal. And so you could be saying to yourself, hey, I think I should pick up Hunter Henry. What say you, Joe? And how much FAAB are you going for Henry?
I definitely think he's worth a pickup and worth a look. There's not a lot of great pass catchers and great options at wide receiver for this New England Patriots team. And Hunter Henry's always kind of just going to be there. He's, like you said, he's been around a while. He's just kind of that reliable target. I'm actually surprised he hasn't gotten a touchdown yet, because that's kind of where we had seen his utilization before, was like heavy red zone. But I mean, the fact that he had 8 receptions for over 100 yards in this game against the Seahawks. I mean, maybe you're somebody who has, Evan Ingram was out in this game. Maybe you lost David Njoku. I mean, the tight end landscape, like you said, has been really disappointing. And I think Hunter Henry's definitely worth an add and a look. I think you could probably get him for 5%. I don't think anyone's really that excited for Hunter Henry. So I mean, if you really want him in a really dire situation, you might be able to go more. But I think at the 5% mark, you should be able to pick him up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think 5% sounds about right. I mean, look at the numbers again. I mean, he led the team in snaps with 57, led the team in routes run with 28, and he had 10 targets, which, I mean, the next closest person was Ramondre Stevenson at 4. The interesting part was, I think the biggest reason why you liked, I'm not say the biggest reason, but one of the main reasons why you liked him was thinking if Drake May was the quarterback, a young quarterback's best friend's the tight end. But it's really Jacoby Brissett who was hyper-targeting him and not Drake May. The team in general, New England, has performed a lot better than a lot of people thought. I mean, they are not a team that's going to go down easy. So, I mean, if you got even a guy like Travis Kelce who's really not done anything, I mean, I think it'd be really hard. You'd have to have a lot of guts to say, I'm going to pick up Hunter Henry, I'm going to play Henry instead of Kelce. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. But if you're desperate enough, maybe somebody would do it. I mean, he's a guy who did a lot this past week. I think he'd be worth having on your roster.
Yeah, I think I'll be curious to see if he continues to get utilized as heavily. Like I said, I was expecting, more red zone usage, and why I was intrigued by him just because we've seen this guy rack up the touchdowns in years past. But I'm not expecting, many more of these, 8 reception games and over 100 yards. I think a lot of that just kind of dictated with the Seahawks defense, but we'll see. I definitely think he's, worth a look and worth a flyer.
Joe, before we close out the show, do you have any other thoughts as far as waiver wire pickups?
Yeah, Steve, you didn't want to let this guy make the list, so I've got a bonus name to throw out there for you.
Bonus!
Wide receiver Jalen Nailor of the Minnesota Vikings. Look, he's their wide receiver 3, but with Jordan Addison, he stepped up as the wide receiver 2. He's got a touchdown in back-to-back games. Justin Jefferson also left this game with a quad injury, and Darnold seems to like to target this guy in the red zone, so the touchdowns might just keep coming for this guy. I definitely think he's worth an add. He's another guy. You probably don't have to do too much. You might even be able to go 3 to 5% on him as well. But I think he's definitely worth an add at this point.
Had to end with a Joe special as far as a little bonus play to get Jalen Nailor on your rosters.
Absolutely, Steve. He's rostered in 0.5% of ESPN leagues. Let's get this guy rostered in more leagues.
Well, I hope that you end up being one of those owners then who ends up making it at least over 1%.
Yeah, I don't know. Our ESPN league's not deep enough, but there is other leagues that I'm interested in adding.
So that does it for this episode where we talked about some of the top names that you may be considering picking up on waivers and how much FAAB you should put down. And in our next episode, we've got the IDP version. So we're going to be talking about our top 5 names that we're looking at for your waiver wire for your IDP leagues. You're not going to want to miss that. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time.